Awesome. Thanks. So good to be here. I realize that we're kind of about halfway through the seminar. And so I thought I'd just take a minute to reflect on what we've covered so far before we just jump into and also to give a bit of an overview. We started off with helping everybody to learn a little bit about me. And then we dove right into why conflict is difficult, and then into 8 causes of conflict. And then we spent the last session, session number 3, on the biblical response to conflict, really drilling into what the scriptures say, God's perspective. And, I think as we kind of sorted out, there's my side and your side, and then there's God's side. Like how does he see things? And one of the things that we started yesterday, which we'd like to continue today, is we ask everyone to identify what was probably their worst conflict ever, because we like to use that like as just like a bit of a kind of a bit of a case study. So we're going to get into the basic methods of resolving conflict. So not everybody likes methods, but we actually have a 1, 2, 3 step, etc., step process to follow. Some people do like methods and others don't, but we need to present that so that everybody has a practical tool when and it seems like all else is failing, nothing else is working. You can just kind of drop that conflict, whether it's at home or at work or in a church setting. You can drop that conflict into those steps and go from there. We have a special bonus on that a process for marriages as well. And then we're going to talk about conflicting, like what is your or my conflict style, like becoming self-aware. How do we act, and what are intuitive responses, and are they good and are they bad, and what like defines those things. And then also understanding how to prosper in all of our relationships. It's oddly enough, conflict happens with too much with Christians, and yet at the same time, they not only is there conflict, they just don't know how to have good relationships. So we're really going to look at that in the context of conflict. And then, like that bonus session, if people can hang around, we're going to be discussing like really what about preventing conflict, like preventative maintenance. And I know for many years, part of my daily prayer regimen. Now I don't actually use that same wineskin, that same regiment right now, but part of my daily prayer regiment was I prayed a prayer like, I forgive everyone in advance who would offend me today. So I kind of trying to eliminate, before it even happens, an offense or a situation that's going to down fall, go downhill into conflict. And then I would also actually say specifically words of criticism that would affect my reputation, or secondly, areas of finances. So, I mean, I guess that's a practical tool as well. But we're going to talk about more of those things in the bonus session. So yeah. Anyways, I'm just settle in here for the day and this afternoon. Appreciate everybody being a part, and we're going to give you, I believe, some tools that are going to help you not only resolve conflict, but help others that are in the midst of conflict. And also, so much time goes into conflict situations that are out of control. And I believe that as you learn to manage conflict, that you'll be more released into your destiny, more released into your purpose, less distracted from what God really has for you. And so that's what we're going. I'm glad we're just see what God's going to do. It's exciting. An exciting day. So I want to go into this session for the basic methods of resolving conflict. So this is where we're actually getting into the method. And I have a bit of an overview here, right here in your notes, steps to deal with conflict. I have 6 steps that we're going to go through. I'll just read through them right now, and then we'll go back and look at each one. Number 1, gain agreement that there is a problem. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it's just your problem and not their problem. And maybe sometimes it's just their problem and not your problem. So you have to, anyway, sort that out. Gain agreement that there's a problem. 2, identify the consequences up front of what this unresolved conflict is going to do. 3, pray together in faith and ask for wisdom and solutions. So that, of course, would be when there's a conflict with other Christians or even a non-Christian. You can pray with them as well. Number 4, mutually agree on some actions. Number 5, follow up and measure progress. And number 6, if the conflict cannot be resolved, seek help from an objective outside source that you both trust. So we're going to go and go ahead and take a look at each one of these as we're developing a systematic model for conflict resolution. Our personalities, how we're made. We talked about this stuff yesterday, or not yesterday, but in the previous sessions, I should say. There's a conflict is really a part of life. It's not necessarily bad. A sports competition is a conflict between two parties, but unfortunately, at the end of that, when the buzzer rings, with a few exceptions, everybody walks away and mostly shakes hands and comes back at it another day. So that's a conflict, but it's regulated and so forth. And people with strong passions and strong personalities do great things. They accomplish great things, or may be successful in business or ministry. And a lot of times those achievements come because they boldly believe that they are right. And so, in a lot of instances, I hope you boldly believe that you are right and confident in the things that God's shown you and confident in your gifts and so forth. But those same strengths then can really become weaknesses when those things deteriorate into conflict. And that's where discernment is needed. And so that these conflicts can be resolved. And as I did in the previous sessions, I plan to use personal examples from my own life, as well as from other folks that I know or have been involved with. And so step number 1 is gain agreement that a problem exists. So like I mentioned, there's situations where it is just you. You have a conflict with somebody and they don't have any problem with you. You have they did something that irritated you and they didn't even notice. Sometimes, and we'll talk more about this in the bonus session, sometimes we develop a conflict because we pick up an offense that's somebody else's offense. So like a lot of times this will happen in a marriage, like something will happen to the husband at work and he goes home and tells his wife and she gets really mad, but she can't do anything about it. And he goes back to work the next day and they laugh at with his coworker, laughs it off. Sorry, let's not worry about it. Let's move on. But the wife has this conflict with this coworker that is just simmering, and we call this secondhand offense, when you actually to pick something up for somebody else, and that other person is already over it, but you're like carrying this. It could be your spouse's boss, maybe didn't feel like your spouse was treated well, and you kind of carry this, and in that situation, you'll never gain agreement that the problem exists, because that other person, that one person once removed, like they don't even know that you have a concern, and so it's as simple as it may seem. It is important that you first agree that a problem exists, and it's true too that sometimes I've sat with people and I said, hey, let's talk, let's go for a coffee, and because I thought I was really at an opposite side of the spectrum, but the more I talked to them, I realized, like, oh, you know what, I think our views are aligned, and there wasn't really that much of a conflict. That's why whenever we're at this first step of gaining agreement that a problem exists, we have to really listen and listen to and discern the views of the other person. And so a lot of times we're before we do this, we're going to pray for discernment, and we want to ask them questions. So we want to ask questions that allow the other person to share their heart, but we want to ask them in a way that we want to ask our questions in a way that does not provoke reaction. And I actually, in later in this session, I believe it's this session, I actually have like about 10 ways that we can start conversations that we're in a potential conflict or already in a conflict and so forth. But so we want to ask with statements that are like open-ended, and they're they're there to draw the other person out and try to understand their point of view, because you don't know that you have a conflict until you really hear their heart. So like we can dialogue with phrases like, hey, when you do the X, then I makes me feel like this. For an example of like this, and just an example. So what it is, it's not saying you reject me. It says, when you do this, I feel like you're rejecting me. So it's not an accusation. It's less accusational, because an accusation will cause defensive walls to come up, and that causes reaction. So here's a good example. When you speak in that tone of voice, I feel like you're devaluing me because you're treating me like a child. So just even that language is going to kind of start to minimize reaction and to quench the fire, if there is a fire in the conflict. Um, and I think humility and honesty are always the best place to start in these kind of a situations where you're, again, even in your agreeing, you can just be and say, well, I don't always listen very well. I'm a very outgoing, I'm a verbal person, so I'll just like go ahead and put that out there. I'm not as good a listener as I am speaker. So maybe I just didn't hear what you were trying to say. Maybe I didn't hear you correctly. And then you go back to those clarifying statements like, did you mean this? So that we had the in our first session, we talked about, well, there's what you thought you said and what you said, and then there's what they heard and what they thought they heard. And so you have all that creates the need for clarifying statements. When you said this, did you mean this? So that you're really finding out that you have a conflict. So assuming that you have identified, you've gained agreement that, yeah, we do have a problem, we're on opposite sides of this, and there's hurt or there's pain, then you start to, it's very helpful. And then step number 2 is identify the consequences up front. So asking yourself, I think I have in your notes there, what is the worst possible consequence if this conflict is never addressed and never resolved? And that kind of adds the weight to it. So if it's a conflict with, somebody, this is a conflict with somebody I met on the street. I just happened to walk in front of them or accidentally stepped on their dog. And well, like it might be an issue back and forth between the two of us, but really, if it's not resolved, I can just walk away and probably never see that person again. And I actually thinking now as I talked about this, I had an incident where I accidentally offended somebody on the road. And this guy was behind me, and he was blowing the horn, and it was accidentally, he misinterpreted a hand motion that I meant to be a friendly motion. He misinterpreted, and he's bad. He was very bad and responding, with some vulgar gestures and all this. I'm like, wow, I don't, but the consequence was, if he didn't follow me home, everything was going to be okay, and I would probably never see this person again. And so there wasn't a long-term consequence to that situation. So I did all that I could, but at the end of the day, I didn't try and get his license number to get back to him to try and explain myself or what I was trying to say, because it was just too complex. Don't need to do that. However, if I'm in a conflict with a coworker that I work with every day, then there's going to be a real consequence to that. Like it's going to be difficult for us to work every day and interact. And I'm just going to, if I don't resolve that conflict, I won't have trust for that individual. In fact, it's interesting, we talked about we talked about how opposites attract. However, sometimes when, like, actually in our office, there's another individual that is very much like me in their spiritual gifting and their natural gifting. They're very much like me. And because we're so much the same, we actually kind of tend to see things oppositely. Like our personalities are very similar. So we kind of oftentimes see each other and I think it kind of bugs us, and you'll probably find this true, that you see some of yourself in that other person that's like you, and it kind of bugs you about them because it bugs you about me, if that makes sense. I don't know. It kind of reciprocates back and forth a little bit like that. And but so like if I can't trust that person that I'm working with, it's going to ruin our work environment. I'm going to have a lot of bad days trying to tiptoe around him, or to do extra work, or go out of the way not to be in the same room that he's in. That's a long-term problem. And so that cannot go unresolved. And I love, now I don't believe I have this in your notes, but 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, Paul's talking, he's addressing the Corinthian church. I'll just read here a little bit. He's addressing dissension in the early church by appealing to them for them to make an adjustment so that unity could prevail. So he says, I appeal to you, dear brothers and sisters, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, to live in harmony with each other. Let there be no divisions in the church. Rather, be of one mind, united in thought and purpose. Now, it's interesting, as you finish that up with 1 Corinthians, or with verse 10, it's interesting that Paul never took anybody's side. He was just like, he didn't say you're right and you're wrong. So, I mean, he might have maybe other places he has if it's a theological problem or discussion that's going on. But here he just said, grow up and you get in the same room and figure it out. Like, this is what maturity is all about. And so he gave them that admission, because unity was too important long term. The consequence of disunity in the church there, that was a bad consequence. And Paul wasn't going to stand for disunity, but he said, oh, you guys go figure it out. Like, you're mature men and women, whoever it was, I don't know. But you guys, you just go ahead and figure it out. So that's number 2. Number 3, pray together in faith, asking the Lord for wisdom and solutions. So this, it might not seem like this is like, rocket science and, necessarily. But once you have you've ascertained that there's a long-term consequence that's negative, now we have to take action. So pray together in faith, asking the Lord for wisdom and solutions. And I believe, I have James chapter 1 and verse 5. It says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. And I believe that a lot of the times God gives that wisdom right then. Like, if you pray and you just wait, God will give you some insight or some wisdom or some bit of a step forward that will hopefully help to unpack a complex situation can be unpacked by various different methods. So we're going to pray together in faith, asking the Lord for wisdom and solutions, and expecting he's going to give it to us, hopefully right away, like while we're waiting and listening. Number 4 then is mutually agree on an action. And I always, whenever we're dealing with a problem, I always encourage, when I'm going to a meeting where I know we're going to be talking about a problem, I try to go with solutions in mind. And if I'm leading the meeting, I oftentimes encourage people, here's the situation we're facing, come with solutions in mind. And what happens if you don't think forwardly towards solution, you spend so much time on the problem that and all the intricacies of the problem, you never focus on the solution. And so the best thing to do in these situations, a lot of times, is just to get into, I believe, like a friendly session of brainstorming. And we've prayed now, and so we want to list possible actions, but it has to be like, you might have some ideas, the other person might have some ideas. We could just ignore this and hope it goes away, walk away. We could, maybe we need to have a coffee together. A lot of times, come back. Sometimes it's helpful to come back with specific solutions and identify a place and a time to come back with those solutions. Another possible step, again, I'm just kind of rambling about in a workplace, but is to have the two of us come meet with our supervisor to help to sort it out. And if we can't get resolution, just call in the supervisor. That's what he gets paid to do, she or she. And so we can bring them in to help bring bring resolution, because you have to, but you have to agree on whatever action it is. If it's to wait till tomorrow, you have to agree on that. If, hey, we're going to take an hour to figure it out right now. If let's meet in, I need to go get some more information that's going to be helpful for you. I'm going to bring that back, and we're going to, if we get that information, would that satisfy the desire for you have? Because we're really looking for what's in their heart, what is their desire. So it could be a surfacey issue, but then there's something deeper underneath. There might be a rivalry. We're going to talk about comparison here in one of the later sessions, and there might be some rivalry, there might be some hidden reason. And so by agreeing on an action, you can find out the thing. What are you really looking for? Well, if I had that data that you said you used to make that decision, then I could agree with your decision. Well, okay, let's go get that data and put it in front of us and see how I arrived at that decision. I've been wrong before, but here's the data, and we can look at it together. So agree on an action. Here we have Amos chapter 3 and verse 3 as well. It says, can two people walk together without agreeing on the direction? Obviously, clarity there is to agree to walk together, to walk forward. And it breeds respect for the other person as well. Number 5, follow up and measure progress. So sometimes it's good to have a follow up and to maybe set a specific date, like let's talk after our next staff meeting to see if we need to do anything more to resolve this issue. Sometimes in my life, if I know I've had some ongoing conflict, I'll kind of go out of my way to certainly not to avoid that person, but I'll kind of go out of my way to make sure there's no possibility of conflict going forward. Like I always make sure I'm like, if I know that person, I'm thinking like, if I don't, if I'm 10 minutes late, they might say, that might just really bug them. So if I'm 10 minutes late, I'll say, hey, I apologize. I was 10 minutes late. They're sorry. If I kind of know already, that might be the thing that bugs them. Like I'll make a kind of an internal plan. Again, but because we have to release it, we have to be able to walk away. And ideally, we want to resolve the conflict so that it's not going to come up a year from now, or 5 years from now, or even 10 years from now. If we can keep the core issue to be the core issue, and decide on a way to evaluate. Maybe even just at the end of the year, like, hey, we had that conflict earlier in the year. Are we okay? Do I do anything that bugs you? Just let me know. I want to try and make sure this relationship is clear. Follow up and measure progress. Number 6, if the conflict cannot be resolved, receive help from an objective, trusted advisor. And a lot of times, here again, you have to be in agreement, like who the advisor is. Like, because if you're really in the middle of the throes of a discussion where there's conflict and you're not getting anywhere, a individual, if you name a person who might be, you have the possibility that the person you're in conflict with might think that person is more inclined to your opinion, or to quote your side. And I'm sure that there really is sides, but so you have to be in agreement for that person that will help to resolve the issue. And so I think that's so important. And in some situations, I would say this, like in the workplace, maybe that person is already in place. Like maybe it is your boss, or somebody if it's in the church, maybe there's an elder or somebody that's already in authority in that setting. Like if it's you and your neighbor that are in conflict, well, there's not really anybody in authority. You could call the mayor or the borough council or whatever. No, but that'd be just silly. So you would maybe ask one of the other neighbors to help bring resolution possibly. But sometimes you're in a situation where there's already an authority there who you could appeal to help bring resolution. I know that's interesting that, I think this has definitely helped my wife and I in our marriage, is that there have been a few times. So we're married 35 years in a week, June the 6th, in 2 weeks, I guess. And there's been a few times over the years, my wife is a very strong person, and we make a great team. So we complement each other well. But over the years, there's been a few times where we just have gotten into something. We're committed. We're not getting divorced, but like we've just gotten into something that we just felt like we need to ask somebody to pray for us. At least ask somebody to pray for us. We felt like just asking for help would bring the humility in. So we got another couple. In that case, it was a pastor. We were youth pastors, and we got another pastor couple, and they prayed for us. They just kind of listened, and we said, here's what's going on. We just knew we needed outside help. And that couple didn't really even get in the weeds on it. Like they just said, yeah, you have a disagreement. And they prayed for us, and honestly, it cleared up. Like it was just the going to that outside source that helped to resolve the conflict. And that's a true story. And so that does work, this outside court of appeal. And maybe it is an expert in your work or has more information or specific things that help you, or maybe there's gifted at conflict resolution, or they might have some, they might be able to say, well, you're both wrong. If somebody you respect, they'll say, well, you're both wrong and you're both right. So probably true in most conflicts. There's probably error on both sides, and that person is helped to see. They can help to see that and help us to see that as well. And it's okay. It's that's part of being human. And it's part of humanity. I'm not sure if I have in your notes now or not. This quote by George Verwer, who's the founder of Operation Mobilization from England. He gives advice to Christians, and he says, "Get familiar with the pain." Ouch! I don't know if I want to hear that. And don't let it be such a big deal. We are going to have pain. We are going to misunderstand and also be misunderstood. We will be hurt at times. We will make mistakes. When we nurse our hurts and dwell on our mistakes, we allow ourselves to hurt and again. Healthy believers will forgive themselves and also others, which will lead to victory. So notice there are times where you need to forgive yourself for your failures. And I've had known some significant times in my life where in order for me to be whole going forward, I had to forgive myself. I knew God forgave me, and I knew the other person forgave me, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. That was such a stupid thing for you to do, Brian. What were you thinking? And I had to actually forgive myself for that thing that I did that caused conflict or caused our organization to be hurt or caused a problem in our organization. And so I think, as we mentioned before, Jesus said offense will come. It's going to come. These situations are going to come. And so we want to become adept at managing them, or we'll just be numb and nothing will happen, and we'll not fulfill the call of God on our lives. So I have a list of here in your notes. Now, these are the list that I'm giving you as conversation starters. These really work. And I've heard people say these, and I've used many of these myself. How to start that difficult conversation. So we're not going to shy away from conflict because it needs to be resolved, and so we're going to do that. And here's how some of those conversations start. The first bullet says, "You see a lot of things correctly, but you start off with an affirmation." But I don't, and then you get to your point that you want to make about what the matter that you're in conflict with them with. So this is a little bit like Paul would do. He's writing to the Corinthian church or writing to Ephesus, and he's like, "You're this, you're amazing." It's kind of like the sandwich method. He starts with encouragement, then speaks to them about their disunity or whatever the problem is, and then ends with encouragement. You're amazing. Like encouragement, correction, encouragement. And so it's a little bit of a picture of that. You see a lot of things correctly, but next phrase that I offer to you as a possibility, I'm wrong a lot, so I might be wrong about this, but X, Y, and Z, fill in the blank there about the point of contention or the point of conflict. It is true, I am wrong a lot, and we all are probably. You have some unique, now the next one, you have some unique life experiences that I do not have, so it is understandable that you see things differently than me. Help me see why you look at it this way. And that's totally the true that people with unique experiences, maybe they grew up in a different country, a different form of government, maybe they only got saved later in life, maybe they're involved in business, that each of us has a unique experience which gives us the glasses, the perspectives that we have. So I think that becomes a very helpful statement. You might talk this one if it applies to you. I'm a natural peacemaker who likes to avoid conflict, but I have strong feelings about this subject, and then go into the subject. Uh, Another simple statement. I was wondering why you forgot to take out the trash 10 times in a row. Anyway, perhaps you are unaware, but blank, fill in the blank. Perhaps you're unaware, but when you made that comment in the meeting we were in yesterday, it really embarrassed me in front of the other people on our staff. There you go. In my opinion, so you're already saying that this is your opinion. You're not saying it's a fact. So it kind of allows for those things to be processed. And so I found that those conversation starters, along with the I feel statements that we mentioned here a little bit earlier, just to be on that. When you do blank, I feel this. Those are very helpful things, very helpful starts to conversations that don't inflame an already hot situation, and they don't throw flame on the fire or whatnot. And so I want to those are there for you. I have also let me run through these quickly. I have a specific 7-step process because we're talking about systems. In this session, we're talking about systems here. So I want to just run through these here. These are specifically written by Steve Perkopchak. In fact, they come from his book that Steve and Mary did called Together. It's a book about premarital counseling. And he identifies 7 steps here. These are not in your notes. So I just want to run through them quickly. This is kind of a bonus. You can kind of open up the door and, look at, even if you want to jot these down, you can go a little deeper on them when you get a chance. Number 1, so this is within a marriage. Steps to resolve conflict in a marriage specifically. Number 1, understand and identify. Understand that any 2 individuals will from time to time come into conflict. Understand means listening and not just wanting to be understood. So it's a little bit like the other steps we had. Number 2, set aside a time. Set aside a time to deal with the conflict. When emotions are out of control, take time to step back, calm down, think, and then come back together. And I know my wife and I have done this. Janet and I have done this where we're going back and forth. And I'm like, you know what, Janet? We're not getting anywhere. Like, I'm not convincing you and you're not convincing me. We're not in unity. We're not going to make this decision now to move ahead because we're not in unity. We have to be in unity. It's always been our barometer for our marriage. And so let's just take a break and let's just, go play a game of miniature golf or go for dinner or just do something different, go for a walk, and then visit this again. So set time aside, but be specific. Don't leave it. It's always good to communicate. Let's talk about this tomorrow morning, or let's talk about this later tonight. But the break, kind of like the timeout, like the reason a coach in a hockey game or a football game or whatever, the reason he calls a timeout a lot of times, a basketball, is to stop the momentum that the other team has. The other team's on a scoring. They've scored 15 points in a row or whatever it is, or 2 goals in a row. And a lot of times a timeout stops that momentum. So if you're in a conversation, conflict, and the momentum is going nowhere or going down, and now we're starting to talk about things that happened 5 years ago, it's escalating. It's like it's time for a timeout to stop that momentum. Walk away and come back at another time, not too long, but at another time after you've had a chance. So number 3, agreement. Discover the areas you're in agreement as well as the areas of disagreement. Like my wife and I might have a conflict about our parenting. And so let's go back, our style of parenting, and let's say, let's go back and what do we agree on? We agree that we love our kids. We agree that one of our kids has a problem in this area, that we need to find a solution. And so use the agreement as a starting point to resolve the disagreement. And at the end, that last little disagreement is going to fall. Number 4, stay on the subject at hand. the immediate conflict. Don't allow the conflict to wander off in unrelated areas. And oh, by the way, when you back the car into the garage, you get way too close to the wall. Like that. No, that was, that was anyway, it's another discussion for another day. Like just stay on, if it's a parenting issue, let's just stay on issue, stay on parenting until parenting is worked out. Number 5, appreciate your spouse's opinion and what they add to the process. When you value the ideas and feelings of your partner, you value that person. So you express appreciation. Janet, you have you are a wise woman. I agree with you 90% of the time. Most of the time you have the wisest opinion and the wisest direction, but this time I don't see it. I'm just not there. And that is true. I'm not, that's not to be flattering. That's absolutely true. In our marriage anyway. Identify the needs. Number 6, allow for the needs of each partner to be met. When the needs are met, the conflict will be resolved. Number 7, explore the options and move toward the solutions. Here we could pray together. And again, this kind of brainstorming. What if we tried this? What if we tried it your way first and then tried it my way second? And, let's try your way for a month and let's try my way for a month. And we can evaluate after 2 months, which is going to be, the better way for us to move forward as in kind of a unity as a policy. So in any case, I want to just take us back here. I do have a discussion question. We kind of, up in our previous sessions, we talked about what is that worst ever conflict that you had. And so I want you to kind of put this template of these systems that I put up there. Maybe it was a marriage conflict, but this first system to follow through to resolve conflict. So I'd like the honest response, like in that worst conflict that you ever had, would this approach have helped? So just kind of to think through, like, here's these 6 things that I gave you, or 7 if it was related to marriage, and that worst case of conflict that you ever had, would these steps have helped? Maybe they wouldn't have, but maybe even just applying one of the steps would have helped. So I'd like to open that up for discussion. And also a second question that I would give you, if you have time, if you're in a format with other people so that you can discuss it, is what unresolved conflict do I presently have that I should apply one of these processes to? So now we're asking about an open unresolved conflict you currently have. What is there one that you should apply this system to? So I'll leave you with those 2 discussion questions.